Robots in space.
Hello everyone, I'm Mike DiVerde, and I'm an aerospace engineer. Today I'm wearing my Ghost in the Shell shirt. Today's episode of Robots in Space, I will discuss the purpose of the OmniFuturists Group and what we're up to in addition to this podcast. I formed the OmniFuturists Group in 2022 primarily because I'd read an excellent book by Callum Chase entitled The Economic Singularity that talked about a new near-future problem in which artificial intelligence and robotics were more cost-effective than human labor, and therefore almost all jobs were given to cognitive automation. The problem, of course, is that without a job, most people would be homeless, starving, without proper medical care, and then they would die miserable and young. I read several other books that discuss this dystopian future as a possible outcome, but I did not come across convincing or serious descriptions of how this might be handled. There seemed to be a lack of plans on how to deal with this. Part of the problem is that many people do not believe it's a likely event, so why spend any time working on something that is never going to happen? Some people think that they'll be exempt from this situation because they have special skills and knowledge that a robot or machine intelligence could never acquire. The reasons why we do not have serious plans for this possible future are not important to me. What is important to me is that a series of options are described and evaluated. Now, at this time, there is increasing political strife and a complete unwillingness to compromise or consider alternatives. There are a few political tribes, and they are applying a political purity test to everything. No one attempts to even consider alternatives. Everyone retreats inside their clubhouse and talks with people within their own echo chamber. I'm attempting something that is fairly rare. I'm trying to intentionally gather a group of people who have wildly different political and economic preferences. I'm trying to get them to respectfully listen to alternatives and consider the pros and cons of all of these potential solutions. And this perspective is where the prefix omni comes from. I literally want all possible alternatives to be considered. Nothing is disallowed. Now, I have my own perspectives and expectations and my own preferred solutions, but I listen to them all. There is a possibility that as we develop as a nascent think tank, that we will develop a concrete evaluation methodology. I like the Delphi method, for example. But we aren't there yet. We're still gathering a variety of options from all over planet Earth. Last year, we published our first book entitled Future Visions. We're just about to release our second edition, and we stayed with the original title. So now we're about to publish Future Visions 2025, with an almost all-new series of chapters from a variety of authors. I will have a series of short interviews with each of the authors. The first book had 12 chapters with 12 different authors. The second book had 14 chapters with 14 different authors. And I believe that we kept only a single chapter from the first book in the second book, so the material is almost all fresh. Each of the authors is going to answer the same series of questions. I'm going to answer my own questions about my own chapter from the original Future Visions here today. Now I will pose the same questions that I plan to ask each of the authors of the chapters of Future Visions and answer for my own chapter, a self-interview, which my beautiful wife Julie thinks is just a hilarious idea that I would interview myself. Okay, so the first question is, do you think that the economic singularity is likely to occur in the next 10 years? If not, when, if ever? I am certain that the economic singularity will occur within 10 years. Actually, I expect it prior to 2030. So I think that we have only about 5 years maximum left. How would you define the onset of the economic singularity? I have developed my own equation and graph to measure our progress towards the economic singularity. Basically, I felt that the discussion was too nebulous and that a concrete, trackable equation and graph and measure could objectively indicate what was happening. It is a very simple measure that is based on two publicly reported numbers. The crux of the economic singularity is the replacement of human labor with cognitive automation. That has everything to do with job loss. We have two well-known measures in America of job loss: labor force participation rate and unemployment. The data for both of the factors are provided by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, and I retrieve them once a month when they are provided by the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank. So, once per month, I will be updating this indicator and publishing the results. These factors measure different things. Labor force participation rate shows a long-term engagement by the workforce. I'll point out that I only use the U.S. male labor force participation rate due to the rise of female participation in the paid labor force over the decades. The data that is available begins in 1948. In 1948, the female paid labor force was vanishingly small. Over time, of course, women appeared more and more in the paid labor force. This growth was independent of automation or lack thereof. This was a changing culture in which it became far more accepted for an adult single woman or a mother to engage in a full career throughout her life. People who are not part of the active labor force and do not show up in the labor force participation rate have given up long-term on finding suitable employment. It is a long-term measure. On the other hand, the unemployment rate shows people who have, unfortunately, fairly recently lost their job and are still expecting to find a good job soon. My understanding is that after about 6 months, most people drop off the ranks of the unemployed and they're no longer counted at all. So, my equation uses both the U.S. male labor force participation rate and the U.S. unemployment rate. I looked for levels that were relatively extreme in both measures. Although the target level of unemployment is 2%, we see levels up to 7% relatively often. The unemployment level has a variation with the economic cycle. The worst case unemployment rate was a 25% unemployment rate during the Great Depression. I selected a 10% unemployment rate as a significant indicator that the economy and the labor force had changed fairly dramatically. The labor force participation rate for men has been dropping since 1948, but it has taken 70 years for it to drop 18%. A dramatic change in labor force participation rate would be a further 18%, but not over a 70-year period, but over the next 5 or 10 years perhaps. So the equation is written from current levels so that it will reach zero once both the unemployment rate reaches 10% and the US male participation rate reaches 50%. Now, there are other combinations of unemployment and participation rate that can cause this measure to drop below zero. That's probably not that critical. A slightly higher unemployment rate or a slightly lower participation rate is not going to change the verdict on the arrival of the economic singularity. There's one more important condition. This indicator must remain below zero for a relatively long time. We've already had one flash below zero in this indicator during the Trump recession. That simply reflected an abysmal economy that was being mismanaged. That did not stem from the onset of widespread cognitive automation. That was the result of incompetence in our federal government. So I've named this measure the Event Horizon Indicator. The symbology that I'm using is a solar eclipse, which in normal conditions the moon does not cover the sun. Once the Event Horizon Indicator reaches zero, then the symbology will be a total solar eclipse. You see the graph of the Event Horizon Indicator behind me. How do you think that humanity should deal with the economic singularity? Well, I'm going to focus the question on America because I really don't have a good understanding of how the rest of the world should or would deal with this. Within America, I'm very pessimistic that our federal government would properly prepare to house and feed 300 plus million Americans. So I'm framing my answer on the expectation that for many years people are on their own. I expect that, as we do today, the homeless will have a very difficult time getting shelter, the hungry will have a very difficult time finding good food, and those who cannot afford medical insurance have an extremely hard time getting a doctor to work with them on their health issues. So what I would advise Americans to do is to gather in small groups on small farms and create co-ops to provide their own food on a survival basis. This is not a glamorous solution. I think it's a dirt poor survival solution. I've done enough very rough calculations that I'm convinced that either a universal basic income is too small an amount of money to make a difference, or it is enough money per person to make a difference, but the US federal budget could never afford it. Universal basic income is a deception, a pacifier, and a distraction that's going to keep people from preparing properly. Do you think that we will ever achieve superabundance? I absolutely believe that we will achieve superabundance. I'm counting on artificial superintelligence coupled with cognitive automation to deliver a well-developed plan that provides enough for all, and I mean all. I expect that we'll go through a horrible period of the economic singularity, which will be alleviated by an inspired solution from an artificial superintelligence that can reach beyond the greed of the current oligarchy. Are you concerned at all about the arrival of artificial superintelligence? Oh yes, I'm I'm concerned about the possible variations in artificial superintelligences. I'm hoping that there are a series of these and that at least several of them are in possession of a good character and good morals. I think that there will be some that are completely evil and that will be encouraged to continue the wealth pump from the working class people up to the oligarchy. What other topic is first and foremost in your mind? For example, space travel and colonization, or super longevity, or crypto, or geopolitics, or quantum mechanics and quantum computers, etc. Well, robotic space travel is first and foremost in my mind. I think that it is too risky at this point for humans to travel in space. I don't think that we have characterized all of the significant risks of death and terminal illness from the space environment. I would like us to spend the next couple decades sending robotic spacecraft out to completely characterize the radiation and microgravity and chemical characteristics of some of the nearby moons and planets before we try to send too many people out there to die. Once we not only understand the risks, but we also have developed wonderful technologies to protect humans, once they are beyond the beautiful protection provided by planet Earth's magnetosphere and atmosphere, then it'll make sense to start sending people out to permanently live on other planets and moons within our solar system. OmniFuturists